What I'm struck with the testimony of all four of you, and of course the readings that we had in preparing for this hearing, is the fact of secrecy itself. You know, why do we need this secrecy? And I'm asking this question to all four of you. What threats do you think exist to the national security that warrants this kind of security, this kind of an approach? Please.
I started to say before, I can see 6 reasons for our government and other governments to keep things classified. First, you want to figure out how they work. They make wonderful weapons delivery and defense systems. And with the Cold War going on, if you do have wreckage and you want to figure out something, you're not going to want to tell your enemies. The second problem is, what if they figure out how they work before you do? You don't want them to know, you know, they know. Weapon, counter-weapon, counter-counter-weapon. We've been playing this game a long time. The third problem is, if there were an announcement, I say by highly trusted individuals, it's a little hard to find them around the planet, but my favorite odd couple is the Pope and the Queen. They're about the same age, or they were until recently anyway. If they were to make an announcement that indeed UFOs are visiting, the planet's being visited, what would happen? Church attendance would go up, mental hospital admissions would go up, the stock market would go down. But I think based on 600 college lectures that the younger generation, which unlike me and probably you wasn't alive when there wasn't a space program. There was strong sentiment against space travel back not too many years ago. The younger generation would push for an Earthling orientation. Let's face it, from an alien viewpoint, we are all Earthlings, Terrans, as the science fiction writers would say. I know of no government on this planet that wants its people to owe their allegiance to the planet instead of that individual government. As far as I can tell, nationalism is the only game in town. There are some religious problems, extremists who say we're the only intelligent life in the universe and their followers don't want any part of visitors from outer space. It can't be. The planet was created in 4004 BC instead of 4 billion in 4 BC. A final thing, I have 7 times heard of cases in which pilots were scrambled to chase UFOs. There was a regulation issued, shoot them down if they don't land when instructed to do so, when 7 pilots didn't come back. These were quiet discussions. These were not big public things. And if I've heard 7, there are a lot more cases like that. There were 200 fatal military plane crashes between 1951 and 56, including 5 where the pilots had over 100 missions in Korea, where there were MiGs trying to shoot them down. That's a pretty good pilot to survive that. Comes back to the United States, no MiGs, and his plane, as the New York Times said, disintegrated or disappeared. 2 strange terms to use in this context. So no families were told anything about that. And it may come as, well, it won't come as a shock to you, but there are 166, Air Force guys on board reconnaissance planes that were tickling North Korea, Russia, and China right after the war. See how quickly the radar came on, what frequency it used, and all that sort of stuff. 166 wind up in planes that were shot down. Not one word in public about that. Families were not told until 2001, where a meeting was called and the medals were given out and an explanation was given. I say that only because a lot of people think, well, certainly they would have told the families, those 7 planes. So that's an area of concern, I think, to admit that we can't do anything about these guys. Powerlessness is not something that attracts people to government.
May I add a very quick follow-up and not taking a lot of time? I talked earlier about why I think that the possession of certain radical technology would have initiated some of this secrecy. Also, I think the need to maintain some level of social control, not knowing what these other beings were, at least in the early years. But I think what happens is once a secret goes on for long enough, it becomes a real nightmare to kind of contain. I can only imagine the difficulty that President Obama would face if he were somehow to make this announcement. I mean, really. if he were if something were to force him to make an admission that yes, these UFOs apparently, at least some of them, are real. What does he then say at this press conference? I know what he'd like to say, which is, well, thanks everyone, I'm going on a vacation for about 6 months. Because there are a lot of follow-up questions that would be, frankly, very uncomfortable for him to deal with. I think one of the questions that most responsible journalists would want to ask is, how on earth were you guys able to keep this secret for over 60 years? How did you do it? And the implications for getting into that whole issue are a nightmare, because you're starting to deal with, has there been some level of control or over the mainstream major media, academic community? In fact, there are many off-the-shelf academic studies that show intelligence community influence over our major journalism and over our major academic communities. It's not a big secret. This is a long-standing relationship. But there would be some very deep questions to ask about that, about the nature of special access programs and unacknowledged special access programs, the primordial black budget. All of these would now become the target of citizen inquiry. And I believe firmly that an admission on this topic, in addition to all of the scientific and existential issues that it raises, also gets into just some nasty, concrete political issues that I don't think any presidential administration would want to have to deal with.
And I could add to
Please.
that, from leaked sources, military and intel that I have encountered in my career, there is a complexity that as you go deeper beyond lights in the sky craft, a government interest in back engineering technology. There is testimony from, for example, someone who had worked at Wright-Patterson in the medical department, who has told me, and this is a historic fact as far as I know, that on one of the first autopsies that were done from one of the crashes in Roswell in 1947, and that was not the beginning. We had been retrieving craft and bodies from at least 1941 in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. But in terms of Roswell, one of the bodies, when the surgeon took a scalpel to start a T or a Y section on the autopsy, the report was, this is not tissue, it was fabric. And that in 1947, our government was discovering that they weren't probably dealing with the prime intelligence that was behind the craft, that they were dealing with something that would fall into the area of androidism. Today, we have drones that are overflying the world. Back in 1947, our government came to understand that some of the bodies that they were taking from these craft were not even biological tissue as we understand it. And then you combine that with a sentence that I read in the alleged briefing paper that I was shown at Kirtland Air Force Base in the OSI office, the quote, which has never left my mind: these extraterrestrial biological entities manipulated DNA in already evolving primates to create Homo sapien, close quote. Then that suggests that the relationship between what is in the skies, on the ground, underground, and interacting with humans and animals and plant life on this planet, as one man working for the DIA in retirement told me, Linda, we are convinced that the intelligence interacting with this planet has been here for more than 270 million years, predating the dinosaurs. If the size and the scope of this is that large, and if our government began to stumble onto these facts piece by piece in World War II and after, then I can understand why President Truman and Churchill and Eisenhower and that group of people would have said, let's wait 2 generations until we find out what we're dealing with. And what makes me nervous and what bothers me is why in 2013 is the policy of denial not only in effect, but the people that I am talking to on the phone have visits by somebody from the government saying, you are not to talk to Linda Moulton Howe ever again. Something is very wrong in the underbelly of this country that I think is related directly to a policy of denial from World War II about the fact that extraterrestrial biological entities, to use our government's own phrase in its own alleged documents, are interacting with this planet, have been for centuries, and that there is an intimate relationship between what we are and what they made. And that might explain why there's no wholesale evidence anywhere that the non-humans want to kill humans. They want, it appears, from my point of view as an investigative reporter talking with so many people, that there is an ongoing research program about what is happening on this planet and the surface life on Earth.
How much time do I have left?